He called her a gold digger. He told the court she was nothing but a charity case he'd picked up from a diner. Austin Blackwood, the tech billionaire of the year, sat in that Manhattan courtroom, surrounded by his shark lawyers, laughing as they listed his wife's 0 assets. The gallery snickered. The press scribbled down every insult. But the mockery stopped the second Judge Steinberg opened the final sealed document. His face went pale. He looked at the trembling wife, then back at the arrogant husband, and read her true birth name aloud. In 1 second, the laughter died. The lawyers froze, and Austin realized he hadn't just lost the lawsuit, he had just declared war on the most powerful family in America. And he was about to lose everything. The penthouse at 432 Park Avenue smelled of sandalwood and betrayal. It was a cold, sterile smell, expensive, just like everything else in Austin Blackwood's life. Catherine sat on the edge of the sprawling Italian leather sofa, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She was wearing a simple grey cardigan she'd bought at Target 3 years ago, and jeans that were fraying at the hem. In this room, surrounded by 10-foot glass windows overlooking Central Park and modern art pieces worth more than most people's lifetime earnings, she looked like a stain, a mistake. That was certainly how Austin looked at her now. "Make it easy on yourself, Kat," Austin said, not even looking up from his phone. He was standing by the wet bar, pouring himself a glass of Pappy Van Winkle. He was 34, handsome in a sharp, predatory way, with the kind of jawline that graced the covers of Forbes and GQ. "Sign the papers. Take the 50,000. Go back to wherever it is people like you go. Ohio, Utah." "I'm from Connecticut, Austin," she said, softly. He waved a dismissive hand. "Same thing. Boring. Look, my lawyers. Bradford and Sterling, they're going to eat you alive if you try to fight this. I'm being generous. You were a waitress when I found you. I gave you 5 years of luxury. You lived in my house, ate my food, wore clothes I paid for. Consider the 50 grand a severance package. Catherine." Kat to him. But she had always preferred her full name, looked at the papers on the coffee table. It was a brutal prenuptial enforcement, followed by a divorce filing that cited irreconcilable differences and painted her as a financial burden. "I don't want the money, Austin," she said, her voice steady, despite the shaking in her hands. "I just want to know why. Last week we were talking about an anniversary trip to the Amalfi Coast. Today you're throwing me out." Austin finally turned to face her. He took a sip of the bourbon, his eyes cold. "Last week I was finalizing the merger with Kincaid Tech. I needed to look like a stable family man. The deal is done now. I don't need the prop anymore." The cruelty of it took her breath away. "A prop? I nursed you when you had pneumonia. I helped you organize the pitch decks when you were starting Nebula. I cooked for your investors when we couldn't afford catering. You chopped vegetables, Kat. Don't act like you coded the software," he sneered. "And let's be honest, I've outgrown you. I need someone who fits the brand. Someone with pedigree, class, not a diner waitress who got lucky." The elevator doors chimed, sliding open to reveal a woman. She was tall, blonde, and wearing a red dress that cost more than Catherine's first car. It was Tiffany Austin's VP of marketing. Tiffany didn't even look at Catherine. She walked straight to Austin, took the glass from his hand, and took a sip. "Is she still here?" "The movers are downstairs, Austin. We have the gala at the Met tonight. We need her gone." Catherine stood up slowly. The shock was fading, replaced by a dull, throbbing ache in her chest. But beneath the ache, something else was stirring. A memory. A promise she had made to her grandmother a long time ago. Never let them see you bleed, little bird." "You're making a mistake, Austin," Catherine said quietly. Austin laughed. It was a bark of genuine amusement. He looked at Tiffany. "Did you hear that? She thinks I'm making a mistake. Honey, the only mistake I made was not getting a sharkier lawyer for the prenup. Now get out, or I'll have security drag you out." Catherine looked at him one last time. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply reached into her purse, pulled out a key card, the access key to the penthouse, and dropped it on the glass table. It made a sharp clack. "I'll see you in court," she said. "Bring it on." Austin smirked. "I hope you can afford a public defender." She walked to the elevator, her sneakers silent on the marble floor. As the doors closed, she saw Austin and Tiffany laughing already, forgetting she existed. They didn't know. How could they? For 5 years, Catherine had been careful. She had buried her past so deep, she almost forgot it herself. She had wanted to be loved for her, not for the heavy golden burden of her lineage. She pulled out her cracked iPhone as she stepped out onto the busy Manhattan street. She dialed a number she hadn't called in 7 years. It rang once, twice. Then a deep, cultured voice answered. "Hello." "Uncle Charles," Catherine said, her voice finally breaking. "It's me, it's Victoria." There was a heavy silence on the line. Then the voice softened, dropping an octave. "Victoria, my God. We didn't know where you were. Is everything all right?" "No," she said, looking up at the towering skyscraper where her husband was currently celebrating her departure. "I need the family lawyers. I need the firm." "Consider it done," Charles said, his voice turning to steel. "Welcome back to the world, Victoria." 3 weeks later, the preliminary hearing was scheduled at the New York Supreme Court Civil Branch in Lower Manhattan. Austin arrived in a black Escalade, stepping out with the confidence of a man who owned the city. He was flanked by his legal team, Bradford and Sterling. They were the fixers of New York, the kind of lawyers who cost $1,500 an hour and specialized in destroying the opposition. Bradford, the lead attorney, was a stout man with a face like a bulldog and a suit that cost 10 grand. "This will be quick, Austin," Bradford said as they walked up the courthouse steps, ignoring the paparazzi. "She hasn't filed a response. No lawyer has contacted us. She'll probably show up with a legal aid rep and beg for a settlement. We'll offer her 20 grand, take it or leave it." "Make it 10, Austin said, adjusting his Rolex Daytona. "She needs to learn her place." Inside the courtroom, the air was stale. Judge Harrison Steinberg was presiding. Steinberg was known as the Butcher in divorce courts because he had zero patience for dramatics. He was an old-school New Yorker with thick glasses and a permanent scowl. Austin sat at the plaintiff's table, tapping away on his phone. Tiffany was in the gallery behind him, wearing oversized sunglasses, looking bored. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Judge Steinberg took the bench. He shuffled through the files, looking annoyed. "All right, Blackwood vs. Blackwood. Let's get this over with. Counsel for the plaintiff. Here, Your Honor. Arthur Bradford, representing Mr. Austin Blackwood." Bradford boomed, standing up. "And for the defendant—" The judge looked at the empty table on the other side. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened. It wasn't a legal aid lawyer who walked in. First came a young associate carrying 3 briefcases, then another associate, then a tall, silver-haired man in a bespoke navy suit that whispered of old money and quiet power. He walked with a cane, not out of infirmity but out of style. A murmur went through the courtroom. Even the court reporter stopped typing. Arthur Bradford's jaw dropped slightly. He nudged Austin. That's Charles Remington." Austin frowned. "Who? Charles Remington?" Bradford hissed. "He's the senior partner at Remington, Hale and Locke. They don't do divorces. They handle international mergers, sovereign debt, and royalty. Why is he here?" Catherine walked in behind Charles. She wasn't wearing the grey cardigan anymore. She was wearing a cream-coloured pantsuit that fit her perfectly tailored to within an inch of its life. Her hair, usually tied back in a messy bun, was blown out in sleek chestnut waves. She wore no jewellery except for a small vintage brooch on her lapel. She didn't look at Austin. She walked to the defendant's table and sat down. Charles Remington sat beside her, placing a single thin file on the desk. "Your Honor," Charles said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried to the back of the room effortlessly. "Charles Remington, representing the defendant." Judge Steinberg peered over his glasses. His eyebrows shot up. "Mr. Remington, I haven't seen you in family court since the breakdown of the Astor marriage in '98. "I make exceptions for special cases, Your Honor," Charles said with a polite nod. Austin leaned over to Bradford. "I don't care who he is. Crush him. She has no money to pay him. She's probably bluffing." Bradford stood up, buttoning his jacket. He decided to go on the offensive immediately. "Your Honor," Bradford began using his most condescending tone. "While we appreciate Mr. Remington's presence, this is a simple case. My client, Mr. Blackwood, is a self-made billionaire. The defendant is a woman of modest means, a former waitress with 0 assets to her name. We have a pre-nuptial agreement signed 5 years ago that clearly states she leaves with what she came in with, nothing." He turned to look at Catherine with a sneer. "We are prepared to offer a nuisance settlement to avoid wasting the court's time, but frankly, Mrs. Blackwood is dragging this out to squeeze money from a man whose success she had no part in." Austin smirked. That was the narrative. The genius and the leech. Charles Remington didn't stand up immediately. He waited for the echo of Bradford's voice to die down. Then he slowly rose. "Your Honor," Charles said, "the plaintiff claims my client has 0 assets. He claims she is a leech. He claims the prenuptial agreement is valid." Charles smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "We are not here to contest the divorce. My client wants to be rid of Mr. Blackwood just as much as he wishes to be rid of her. However, we are here to contest the distribution of assets, specifically the ownership of Nebula Tech and the land upon which Mr. Blackwood's factory in Texas is built." Austin laughed out loud. "She's crazy. I built Nebula, and I bought that land." Judge Steinberg banged his gavel. "Mr. Blackwood, silence," Charles continued unfazed. "Mr. Blackwood believes he purchased the land in Austin, Texas 4 years ago from a holding company called Vesper Holdings. He also believes that the initial seed money for his company, $2 million, came from an angel investor named Archibald Trust." "So what?" Austin shouted, ignoring his lawyer's hand on his arm. "Those are valid entities." "Indeed they are," Charles said. "And if Mr. Bradford had done due diligence instead of merely counting his billable hours, he would have looked into who owns Vesper Holdings and the Archibald Trust." Charles opened the thin file. "My client has lived as Catherine Blackwood for 5 years. She has lived humbly. She has chopped vegetables. She has allowed her husband to believe he was the provider. But her name, Your Honor, is not merely Catherine." The tension in the room was palpable, but Austin wasn't buying it. He was a man of the 21st century new money crypto algorithms. He didn't fear old men in suits. "This is a joke," Austin whispered loudly to Bradford. "It's a delay tactic. She's nobody. I met her in a diner in New Jersey. She was wearing an apron stained with ketchup." Bradford stood up, his face red. "Your Honor, this is theatricality. Unless Mr. Remington can prove that the defendant has any claim to these assets, we move for immediate judgment on the pre-enup." "Oh, we can prove it," Charles said softly. "But first I would like to address the mockery my client endured. In the affidavit filed by Mr. Blackwood, he states the wife is uneducated, lacks business acumen, and is essentially a dependent." Charles picked up a piece of paper from the evidence pile. "Mr. Blackwood, did you or did you not force my client to sleep in the guest room for the last 6 months because you said she didn't fit the aesthetic of your new brand image?" Austin rolled his eyes. "She dresses like a pauper. I run a billion-dollar tech firm. Image is everything." "And did you or did you not tell your mistress, Ms. Tiffany Davis, who is currently sitting in the gallery, that your wife was too stupid to understand how credit cards work?" Tiffany shifted uncomfortably in her seat as heads turned toward her. "It was a private conversation," Austin snapped. "And it's true. She never spent money because she was afraid of it. Poor people mentality." "Poor people mentality," Charles repeated, tasting the words. "Interesting." He turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the plaintiff's entire case rests on the premise that he is the financial superior, that he is the titan of industry and she is the peasant. It is this arrogance that has led us here. Because Mr. Blackwood was so convinced of his own brilliance, he never asked his wife about her family. He never asked why she never applied for a passport. He never asked why she insisted on paying for their first date with cash. "Because she was broke," Austin yelled. "No." Catherine spoke for the first time. Her voice was clear, ringing like a bell. She stood up. Austin looked at her. Really looked at her. There was something different about her eyes. The meekness was gone. In its place was a cold, hard resolve that reminded him unsettlingly of the CEO of a rival bank. "I paid cash, Austin," she said, looking him dead in the eye. "Because if I used my card, the transaction would have been flagged by the family office, and my security team would have descended on that diner within 10 minutes. I was trying to have a normal life. I was trying to escape the name." "What name?" Austin scoffed. "Smith Jones." Judge Steinberg was reading the document Charles had handed him. His eyes were moving back and forth rapidly. He stopped. He looked up. He took off his glasses and cleaned them, then put them back on. "Miss Bradford." The judge said, his voice unusually quiet. "Have you seen the defendant's birth certificate? We have a copy of her driver's license, Your Honor. Catherine Marie Sinclair." "Sinclair is a common name." Bradford shrugged. "Not this Sinclair," the judge said. The judge looked at Catherine with a newfound respect and perhaps a touch of fear. "Mr. Remington," the judge said, "you may proceed with the reading of the record." Charles nodded. He turned to the packed courtroom. "The man my client married is a fraud, not of finance, but of perception. He believes he is a king, but he has been living in a house owned by his wife, building a company funded by his wife on land owned by his wife." Charles turned to Austin. "You mocked her for being poor while you spent her money. You see, the Archibald Trust that gave you your first 2 million Archibald was the name of Catherine's first pony." Laughter rippled through the courtroom. Austin's face went purple. "And Vesper Holdings. Vesper was the name of her grandmother's yacht." "Lies." Austin stood up, knocking his chair over. "Who are you?" he screamed at Catherine. Charles Remington handed a document to the court clerk, who projected it onto the screen for the whole room to see. It was a birth certificate, authenticated and sealed. "Ladies and gentlemen," Charles announced, "may I introduce you to Victoria Catherine Vanderbilt Sinclair, sole heiress to the Sinclair mining fortune, and through her mother's side, the primary shareholder of the Vanderbilt Astor Banking Group." The silence that followed was heavy, absolute, and suffocating. Austin froze. The Sinclair family wasn't just rich. They were American royalty. They owned half of Montana. They owned the steel in the skyscrapers. They owned the banks that Austin begged for loans. "That's impossible," Austin whispered. She worked at a diner." "She was on a gap year," Charles said dryly, rebelling against her father. "She wanted to see if someone could love her for herself, not her billions. She thought she found that man in you." Charles leaned in close to Austin, his voice dropping to a predator's growl. "She was wrong, and now she wants her money back. All of it." The courtroom had descended into a chaotic murmur that Judge Steinberg made no effort to silence immediately. He seemed to be enjoying the spectacle, or perhaps he was simply stunned into inaction. Austin Blackwood stood frozen, his hand still gripping the edge of the mahogany table, his knuckles white. The name Sinclair hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. It wasn't just a name. In New York, it was an institution. It meant the Metropolitan Museum Wing, named after her grandmother. It meant the Sinclair Medical Center uptown. It meant power that didn't need to shout because it owned the building. "Order," Judge Steinberg finally said, though his voice lacked its usual bite. "Order in the court." Austin turned to Bradford. "Fix this," he hissed, sweat beading on his forehead, despite the aggressive air conditioning. "Tell them it's fraud. She lied to me. That has to void the prenup right. Identity fraud." Bradford, usually the pit bull of matrimonial law, looked like a puppy who had just heard thunder. He was furiously texting someone on his phone, likely his own malpractice insurance carrier. "Austin," Bradford whispered, his voice trembling. "Identity fraud implies she used a fake name to commit a crime or steal from you. She used her middle name, and she gave you money. That's not fraud. That's charity." "Mr. Remington," Judge Steinberg said, addressing the silver-haired titan at the defense table. "You mentioned assets, specifically the plaintiff's company, Nebula Tech." Charles Remington smoothed his silk tie. "Yes, Your Honor. You see, when Mr. Blackwood started Nebula, he was, to put it politely, unbankable. He had 3 failed startups and a credit score in the low 600s. No bank would touch him." Charles signaled to his associate, who handed a thick binder to the judge and another to the plaintiff's table. "Exhibit C," Charles continued. "The loan agreement from Archibald Trust. Mr. Blackwood, you signed this 4 years ago. Do you recall?" Austin grabbed the binder. He remembered signing it. He had been so excited to see the $2 million hit his account, he hadn't read the 50 pages of legalese. He had just assumed it was standard angel investor boilerplate. "I signed it," Austin snapped. "It's a loan. I've been making interest payments." "Actually," Charles corrected him, "you've been making interest payments to a shell account that funnels directly into a charitable trust for retired racehorses. But that's beside the point. Please turn to page 42, clause 19, subsection B, the bad boy clause." Austin flipped the pages frantically. The paper crinkled loudly in the silent room. "Read it aloud, please," Charles invited. Austin stared at the paragraph. His throat went dry. In the event that the principal borrower, Austin Blackwood, engages in acts of moral turpitude, public scandal, or files for divorce against the beneficiary, Catherine/Victoria, without cause, the lender reserves the right to call in the full principal immediately along with all equity used as collateral. Equity used as collateral, Charles repeated, savouring the words. Mr. Blackwood. What did you put up as collateral for that $2 million? Austin didn't answer. He couldn't breathe. I'll answer for him, Charles said, turning to the gallery. He put up 51% of Nebula Tech, controlling interest. A collective gasp went through the room. The reporters in the back row were typing so fast it sounded like heavy rain. That's illegal, Austin screamed, losing his composure entirely. That's predatory lending. It's a standard contract for high-risk borrowers, Charles said calmly. And you were high-risk, Austin. My client, your wife, instructed the trust to approve the loan because she believed in your vision. She wanted you to succeed. She wanted you to feel like a man who built something. She protected you from the harsh reality of the market. And how did you repay her? Charles walked over to the plaintiff's table and looked down at Austin. You called her a poor person. You mocked her thriftiness. You didn't know that the reason she darned her own socks and clipped coupons wasn't because she had to, but because she was trying to learn the value of $1, something you clearly never grasped. Bradford finally stood up. Your Honor, we request a recess. We need to review these documents. Denied, Judge Steinberg said instantly. You came here to humiliate this woman and rush a judgment. You wanted speedy justice. You're getting it. Mr. Remington, continue. Thank you, Your Honor. There is also the matter of the factory land in Texas. Vesper Holdings purchased that land for $12 million and leased it to Nebula Tech for, what was it, $1 a year? Yes, Austin croaked. Well, the lease agreement has a termination for convenience clause. Vesper Holdings is exercising that right effective immediately. You have 30 days to move your factory, your machines, and your inventory off Sinclair land. Austin slumped into his chair. Moving the factory would cost millions. It would bankrupt the company. He was trapped. In less than 20 minutes, he had gone from a billionaire divorcing a waitress to a man who owned nothing but a mountain of debt, to the woman he had just cheated on. Tiffany, sitting in the back, stood up. Her heels clicked loudly as she scurried toward the exit. Ms. Davis, Charles called out without looking back. I wouldn't leave just yet. You're named in the alienation of affection lawsuit we filed this morning in North Carolina, where you legally reside. We'll need your deposition. Tiffany froze at the door, her face draining of color. She looked at Austin, then at Catherine. Catherine didn't even turn around. She was looking at her hands, twisting her wedding ring, a simple gold band Austin had bought at a pawn shop for $200 because he said he didn't want to waste capital on jewelry. Catherine took the ring off. She placed it on the table. It made a small, hollow sound. I tried, Austin, she said, her voice soft but amplified by the microphone. I really loved you. I thought you were different from the men in my world. I thought you were hungry and passionate. But you were just hungry. Cat, Victoria, Austin stammered. We can talk about this. The prenup. We can tear it up. We don't need lawyers. We're husband and wife. Charles laughed. It was a dry, terrifying sound. Oh, the prenup, we agree with you, Mr. Blackwood. The prenup is valid. It states you keep what is yours, and she keeps what is hers. Since what is yours is actually hers, by virtue of default on the loan, she keeps everything. Judge Steinberg banged his gavel. Court is adjourned until tomorrow morning to allow the plaintiff to find new counsel, as I suspect Mr. Bradford will be stepping down. Bradford was already packing his briefcase. I'm sorry, Austin, he muttered. Conflict of interest. My firm represents the Sinclair Bank. I can't be here. Austin sat alone at the table as the room emptied. He watched his wife, his poor, uneducated wife, walk out flanked by the best legal mind in the country, stepping into a waiting limousine that probably cost more than his childhood home. The sidewalk outside the courthouse was a frenzy. News of the Sinclair reveal had leaked before the hearing even ended. A sea of cameras, microphones, and shouting reporters blocked the stairs. Usually Austin loved the press. He had a practiced smile, a blue steel look he used for TechCrunch interviews. But today the flashes felt like assault. Mr. Blackwood, is it true you're insolvent? Austin, did you really make a Sinclair heiress live on a budget? Ms. Davis. Are you the other woman who cost him the empire? Austin pushed through the crowd, his security detail overwhelmed. He looked for his Escalade, but it wasn't there. He tapped his phone furiously. The Uber app was surging. He saw Catherine Victoria descending the stairs. The reporters parted for her like the Red Sea. She didn't stop to talk. She wore oversized sunglasses, now looking every inch the American aristocrat she was born to be. She slipped into the back of a vintage Rolls-Royce Phantom that had pulled up to the curb. Charles Remington got in beside her. Austin was left standing on the curb, smelling the exhaust fumes as a rain shower began to fall. By the time he got back to the penthouse, his keycard had been deactivated. I'm sorry, Mr. Blackwood, the doorman. A man named Henry, whom Austin had never tipped in 5 years, said with a polite but firm smile. The leaseholder has instructed us to change the codes. You've been trespassed from the building. I live here, Austin shouted, water dripping from his Armani suit. My stuff is in there. Your personal effects have been boxed and sent to the storage facility in Queens, Henry said, handing him a slip of paper. Here is the address. Austin crumpled the paper and threw it on the ground. He pulled out his phone to call Tiffany. She sent him straight to voicemail. He tried again. Blocked. He checked Twitter. It was a bloodbath. At Blackwood Broke was trending #1 worldwide. Memes of him laughing in court, juxtaposed with the Sinclair family crest, were everywhere. Someone had dug up an old interview where he claimed, I built everything from scratch, no handouts. The comments were savage. Bro was living on his wife's allowance and thought he was Elon Musk. Imagine cheating on a Sinclair with a marketing VP. That's like trading a diamond for a Jolly Rancher. His phone buzzed. It was the board of directors of Nebula Tech. Austin. The voice of the chairman, Marcus Thorne, usually a friend, was ice cold. We're invoking the emergency bylaws. You're suspended as CEO pending an internal audit. You can't do that, Austin yelled, pacing the wet pavement. I am Nebula. Not anymore. We just got a letter from Remington, Hale and Locke. They are calling in the debt. If we don't remove you, they foreclose on the IP. We have a fiduciary duty to the shareholders to survive. You're out, Austin. Don't come to the office tomorrow. The line went dead. Austin stood in the rain, looking up at the penthouse windows. The lights were on. He imagined Catherine up there, perhaps drinking the expensive wine he had bought, laughing at him. But Catherine wasn't laughing. Inside the penthouse, the mood was somber. The movers were already there, but they weren't packing Austin's things. Those were long gone. They were packing Catherine's modest belongings. You don't have to stay here tonight, Victoria, Charles said gently. The estate in the Hamptons is prepped, or the townhouse on 5th. I need to be here, she said, looking out the window at the tiny figure of her husband on the sidewalk. I need to say goodbye to the life I thought I had. She walked to the wet bar. The bottle of Pappy Van Winkle was still there. She poured the amber liquid down the sink. Did you find out about the other accounts? She asked. Charles nodded, pulling a file from his briefcase. It's worse than we thought. He wasn't just spending money on cars and Tiffany Davis. He was gambling. High-stakes poker rings in Jersey. He's leveraged himself to the hilt. Without your backing the sharks, he borrowed from the real sharks. Not the legal ones will be coming for him. Catherine closed her eyes. He's going to get hurt. That is not your concern anymore, Charles said firmly. He made his bed. He set fire to the sheets. Now he has to sleep in the ashes. I don't want him physically hurt, Charles. I just want him to understand. He understands, Charles said. He understands that he lost. But men like Austin, they don't accept defeat. They get desperate. We need to be careful. He knows you have a soft spot. He will try to use it. As if on cue, Catherine's phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. I know about Zurich. I know what happened in the clinic. Meet me, or I tell the world why the Sinclair princess really ran away 5 years ago. Catherine stared at the screen. Her blood ran cold. Charles, she whispered. He stepped closer, looking at the message. His face hardened into a mask of pure fury. He's digging, Charles said. He's found the one thing we buried. If that gets out, Catherine's voice trembled. It destroys the foundation. It destroys my mother's memory. He's bluffing, Charles said, though he didn't sound convinced. He doesn't have the resources to find out about Zurich. He has desperation, Catherine said. And desperate men find things. She grabbed her coat. I have to meet him. Absolutely not. Charles blocked her path. That is exactly what he wants. We handle this legally. You can't litigate a secret like this, Charles. Once it's said, it's said. The internet never forgets. I have to stop him. She pushed past him. Don't follow me, please. Austin sat in a booth at the back of a 24-hour diner in Hell's Kitchen. It was a far cry from the 4-star restaurants he was used to. The table was sticky, and the coffee tasted like burnt rubber. He looked at the man sitting across from him. The man was greasy, wearing a cheap leather jacket with nicotine-stained fingers. His name was Slater, a private investigator who usually handled insurance fraud, but occasionally did dirtier work. You're sure about this? Austin asked, sliding an envelope across the table. It contained the last $5,000 cash Austin could pull from the ATM before his cards locked. I'm sure, Slater grunted, counting the money. I have a contact at the Swiss clinic. Nurse who got fired for stealing meds. She kept records. Your wife, sorry, Ms. Sinclair, checked in there 6 years ago, under the name Doe. Stayed for 3 months. And the baby? Austin asked, his heart hammering. There was no baby. Slater smirked. That's the point. She didn't go there to have a kid. She went there for rehab. But not for drugs, for little mental instability. Severe breakdown. Apparently she tried to burn down the family summer home. They locked her away to keep it quiet. If the board of her family bank knew the heiress was a certified pyro, with a history of psychosis, the stock would tank. They'd deem her mentally incompetent to control the trust. Austin leaned back. A smile spread across his face. It was the first time he had smiled in 24 hours. Incompetent? Austin whispered. If she's mentally incompetent, she can't sue me. She can't invoke the clauses. Her signature on the loan documents might even be invalid. I could get power of attorney if I play the concerned husband card. It was a long shot, a disgusting Hail Mary pass. But it was all he had. The door of the diner opened. Catherine walked in. She looked out of place among the truckers and the night shift workers. She was wearing a trench coat, her hair tied back. She scanned the room, saw Austin, and walked over. Slater took the hint. "I'll be at the bar," he muttered, sliding out of the booth. Catherine sat down. She didn't look angry anymore. She looked tired. "You wanted to see me," she said. "You look good, Victoria," Austin said, using her real name with a sneer. "Rich suits you better than poor. What do you want, Austin?" "Money. I can write you a check. Just tell me how much to make you go away." "I don't want a check," Austin said, leaning in. "I want my company back. I want the debt forgiven. I want a public apology stating that I was the one who asked for the divorce. And I want $50 million in a separate account for my pain and suffering." Catherine laughed humorlessly. "You're delusional." "Am I?" Austin pulled out a photocopy of a medical file. He slammed it on the sticky table. "Zurich, 2019. The incident with the fire. The psychiatric evaluation." Catherine stared at the paper. She didn't flinch. "You think this scares me?" "It should," Austin said. "If I leak this to the Times, they'll paint you as the crazy heiress, the mad queen. The courts will look at your vindictiveness toward me as a symptom of your illness. I'll petition for conservatorship. I'll say I didn't know you were sick and that I want to help you. You would destroy my mental health history just to save your ego. I'd burn the whole world down to get back what's mine," Austin said. "You taught me that, didn't you, survival of the fittest? Isn't that what your family believes?" Catherine looked at him for a long moment. Then slowly she reached into her bag. Austin tensed. Was she recording him? Did she have a gun? She pulled out a photo, a real physical photograph. She placed it on top of the medical file. It was a picture of a young boy, maybe 18 years old. He looked a lot like Austin, but softer, kinder. "Do you know who this is?" Catherine asked. Austin frowned. "No, who cares? His name was Leo," Catherine said. "He was my fiancé, before you." Austin blinked. "So, he died in that fire, Austin," Catherine said, her voice cracking slightly. "The fire I was accused of starting. The fire that broke me. I didn't know," Austin stammered. "No, you didn't, because you never asked. You see, I didn't start the fire. Leo did. He fell asleep with a cigarette. I tried to pull him out. That's why I was in the clinic. Not for psychosis, for third-degree burns on my back and severe PTSD. The breakdown was grief." She stood up, leaning over the table. "You think you have leverage? You have a tragedy. Go ahead. Leak it. Tell the world I tried to save the man I loved. Tell them I spent a year in rehab learning how to walk again without screaming from the skin grafts. Do it." Austin stared at the photo. The narrative in his head, the crazy wife, the leverage was crumbling. If he leaked this, he wouldn't look like a victim. He would look like a monster attacking a burn survivor. "But here's the twist, Austin." Catherine continued, her eyes cold as steel. "The investigation into that fire. It was never fully closed. The lighter Leo used, it was tampered with. It was a faulty product." She paused. "A product made by a subsidiary of a company called Blackwood Electronics. Your father's failed company. The one you tried to distance yourself from." Austin's face went pale. "What are you talking about? I didn't meet you by accident in that diner, Austin. Catherine whispered. "I sought you out. I wanted to see if the son was different from the father who cut corners and killed my fiancée to save 10 cents on a valve. I wanted to believe you were good. I gave you 5 years to prove you were better than your bloodline." She picked up the photo. "You failed." Catherine turned and walked away. Austin sat frozen in the booth. The medical file lay on the table, useless. The revelation hit him like a physical blow. She hadn't been a random victim. She had been a test, a judge, and he had spent 5 years failing the test without even knowing he was taking it. He looked up. Slater was gone. The diner was empty. His phone rang. It wasn't the board. It wasn't Tiffany. It was the district attorney's office. "Mr. Blackwood," a stern voice asked. "This is D.A. Miller. We've just received a file from the Sinclair estate regarding some irregularities in your initial seed funding documents. Tax evasion, wire fraud, and... well, it's a long list. We have a warrant. Officers are on their way to your location." Austin dropped the phone. He looked out the window. Red and blue lights were flashing in the rain. The rain in New York City has a way of washing away the glamour, leaving behind only the grit. As the red and blue strobe lights of the police cruisers bounced off the wet pavement of Hell's Kitchen, Austin Blackwood felt the cold steel of handcuffs ratcheting tight against his wrists. It wasn't a dignified exit. There was no private exit to a black SUV. Instead, the patrons of the diner truckers, late-night shift workers, and a few college kids pressed their faces against the glass, holding up their phones to record the downfall of the tech visionary. "Mr. Blackwood, you have the right to remain silent," the officer droned, pushing Austin's head down as he guided him into the back of the cruiser. Austin didn't remain silent. "This is a mistake. Do you know who my wife is?" "She's a Sinclair. Call her. She'll clear this up." The officer looked at him in the rearview mirror with pitying eyes. "Buddy, it was the Sinclair lawyers who handed us the hard drive. You're done." The ride to central booking was a blur of nausea and disbelief. Austin sat in the cramped plastic seat, the smell of stale vomit and sanitizer assaulting his senses. His mind raced, trying to find an angle, a loophole, a person he could charm or bribe. But every mental avenue ended in a brick wall. His assets were frozen. His reputation was incinerated. His friends were likely scrubbing their Instagrams of any photos with him right now. He spent the night in a holding cell that smelled of urine and despair. He was still wearing his bespoke Italian suit, now rumpled and stained, looking like a costume from a play that had closed early. The next morning he wasn't taken to a courtroom. He was taken to an interrogation room. The door opened, but it wasn't a lawyer who walked in. It was Victoria. She had changed out of her trench coat. She was wearing a pristine white dress, sharp and architectural. She looked like an avenging angel. Charles Remington stood by the door, acting as a silent sentinel. Austin jumped up. "Cat, Victoria. Thank God. You have to get me out of here. They're talking about wire fraud embezzlement. They're saying I cooked the books at Nebula." Victoria pulled out a metal chair and sat down gracefully. She didn't signal for him to sit. "They're saying that because you did Austin." "Everyone fudges the numbers in the beginning," Austin pleaded, his voice cracking. "It's how you get to the IPO. I was going to pay it all back once we went public. I was doing it for us." "Don't," she said, her voice cutting through the air like a whip. "Do not say you did it for us. You did it for the applause. You did it because you are terrified of being ordinary." She placed a folder on the metal table. "I told you last night about Leo, about how your father's company made the faulty lighter that killed him." "I had nothing to do with that," Austin shouted. "I was a kid. You can't punish me for my father's sins." I never intended to, Victoria said softly. That's the tragedy of this, Austin. When I met you in that diner 5 years ago, I was looking for redemption. I wanted to prove to myself that blood doesn't dictate destiny. I wanted to believe that a Blackwood could be honest, kind, and safe. I wanted to save you from your father's legacy. She opened the folder. It contained technical schematics. They were blueprints for Nebula's flagship product, the automated medical delivery drone. I had my family's forensic accountants look at Nebula's back-end, Austin. Not just the finances, the engineering. Austin went still. You switched the navigation sensors, Victoria said, her voice heavy with disappointment. The specs called for military-grade LiDAR. You swapped them for cheap knockoffs from a shell company to save 40% on production costs. You pocketed the difference. The sensors work fine, Austin defended weakly. They have a failure rate of 3% in heavy rain. Victoria corrected him. 3%. Do you know what happens when a heavy medical drone fails over a populated city street? It falls. It crashes. It kills people. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. You knew the risk. You saw the data, and you signed off on it anyway, because it made the profit margins look better for the investors. You didn't just inherit your father's name, Austin. You inherited his indifference to human life. You were willing to kill someone to save a few dollars. Just like him. Austin slumped back into his chair. The fight drained out of him. The narrative he had built for himself that he was a genius, a visionary, a victim of a crazy wife evaporated. He was just a cheap con man in an expensive suit. So this was all a trap, he whispered. The marriage, the 5 years. No, Victoria said, and for the first time a tear escaped her eye. The marriage was real for me. I loved you. I rooted for you. I waited every single day for you to do the right thing. When you got that loan, I waited for you to be honest. When you built the prototype, I waited for you to prioritize safety. I gave you every chance to be a good man. She stood up, wiping the tear away. You failed the test, Austin. Not because you're poor, not because you're a nobody, but because when you were given power, you used it to hurt people. And I cannot let that happen again. She turned to the door. Wait, Austin cried out, panic seizing him. What happens to me? You can't leave me here. Charles Remington stepped forward. The district attorney has the evidence of the sensor swap. They also have the testimony of your VP, Ms. Davis. Austin's jaw dropped. Tiffany. Ms. Davis is a pragmatist, Charles said with a dry smile. When she realized the ship was sinking, she didn't just swim away. She handed us the captain's log. She's turned state's witness in exchange for immunity. She gave us the emails where you explicitly ordered the cover-up of the sensor failure. The betrayal stung worse than the handcuffs. The woman he had thrown his marriage away for had sold him out for a plea deal. Victoria, Austin sobbed, reaching out. Please, I have nothing. No money, no company, no friends. I'm going to prison. Victoria paused at the door. She didn't look back. You have exactly what you started with, Austin, she said. Your name. I suggest you try to make it mean something better this time. The heavy metal door clanged shut, the sound echoing with a finality that shook Austin to his core. 6 months later, the headlines had shifted. Blackwood guilty had been replaced by newer scandals. The world moved on quickly. Austin Blackwood was sentenced to 12 years in a federal penitentiary for fraud, endangerment, and embezzlement. His assets were liquidated. The penthouse was sold. Nebula Tech was acquired by a larger firm, stripped for parts, and the dangerous drones were recalled and destroyed. On a crisp autumn afternoon in Central Park, Victoria walked along the path where she used to jog when she was pretending to be Cat. She wasn't hiding anymore. She wore a simple coat, but she walked with her head held high. She stopped at a bench overlooking the lake. A man was sitting there, reading a book. He looked up as she approached. It was a doctor she had met during the legal proceedings, a man who ran a non-profit clinic in the Bronx. He didn't care about her last name. He cared that she had funded a new burn unit in honor of her late fiancé. "Ready to go?" he asked, smiling warmly. "Yes," Victoria said. She looked at the skyline one last time. Somewhere in that concrete jungle, the ghost of the girl who tried to be small was gone. She was Victoria Sinclair. She had faced the mockery, the betrayal, and the fire. She had learned that you can wear a mask for a while, but eventually the truth reads your name aloud. And when it does, you better be ready to stand behind it. She took the doctor's hand and walked away from the shadow of the skyscrapers into the light. And that is the story of how Austin Blackwood learned the hardest lesson of all. Never mistake silence for weakness, and never mock the person holding the umbrella just because you're enjoying the rain. He thought he was playing a game of chess against a pawn, never realizing he was sitting across from the queen. Austin wanted a trophy wife to complete his image, but he ended up with a judge, jury, and executioner. It serves as a powerful reminder to us all. Integrity is the only currency that never devalues. You can fake wealth, you can fake status, but you cannot fake character when the pressure is on. What did you think of Victoria's revenge? Was it justice, or was it too harsh? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of karma and twists, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. We release new dramas every week. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.